Hello and welcome to the Home and Energy Chats. My name is Heather Chandler and I am the owner and publisher of the Green and Healthy Maine Homes magazine. Every episode we chat with industry experts to help you learn about healthy, efficient, and sustainable homes. And I am very excited to have two special guests today from Maine Audubon to talk with us about practical ways to support biodiversity in your backyard while mitigating threats to birds like window collisions and light pollution. We did offer a workshop on this topic at our recent Green Home and Energy show, and it was very highly attended, and I was disappointed that I did not personally get to attend, so I'm excited to have Andrew and Nick with us today to learn a little bit more. So I'd like to start by sharing a special thank you to our sponsor of the Home and Energy Chats, Royal River Heat Pumps. They are a locally owned and operated company that is nationally recognized for heat pump excellence and 100% committed to the highest standards of quality installations, service, and practices. And you can learn more about them online at royalriverheatpumps.com. So now a little bit about Green and Healthy Maine Homes before I introduce our panelists. We are dedicated to inspiring healthy, efficient, and future-ready Maine homes. In addition to these home and energy chats, we also publish the Green and Healthy Maine Homes magazine and host, as I mentioned, the Green Home and Energy show, which just took place in early April this year. You can learn more about all of these things on our website, greenmainehomes.com, where we also have a directory of business professionals to support you in your efforts to develop healthy, efficient, high-performing homes. So a reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to our website within the week. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists today. First up, we have Andrew Tufts, and he is the Bringing Nature Home Program Manager at Maine Audubon. He grew up in Tufts and has a background in landscape design, municipal planning, habitat stewardship, and landscape management. The Bringing Nature Home project aims to restore and rebuild Maine's natural biodiversity by planting the native wildflowers, shrubs, and trees that support the widest array of wildlife. Andrew, I'm so happy to have you with us today, so welcome.
Thank you, Heather.
And then next up, we have Nicholas Lund. He is the Advocacy Outreach Manager at Maine Audubon, as well as the co-founder of their Bird Safe Maine, Bird Safe Maine, which is a statewide collaboration to raise awareness about the bird window collision problem and encourage adoption of available solutions through research, policy, design solutions, and education. So Nick, I'm so happy to have you with us today. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Great to be here. Thanks again, Heather. It's great to be here with you all. Today I'm going to talk to you all a little bit about the Bring Nature Home program in Maine Audubon and the importance of biodiversity in our backyards. As Heather mentioned, our Bring Nature Home program is really focused on restoring and rebuilding Maine's natural biodiversity by planting native plants that support the widest array of wildlife. For a long time, the conservation community kind of turned its back on the places where we live, our developed landscapes, and thought of it as potentially less important for wildlife than our conserved and wild lands. And what we've come to find out is we've developed so much of our landscape that we don't have that choice anymore. We need to turn our attention to the places where we live and bring nature back in. And so today I'm going to talk about how we do that, the importance of doing that, and give you some tips on how to go about doing it. And so to start, I just wanted to show this picture. This is a site in northern Maine that I took on a bike ride on a logging road, and it's a logging site. And I took the photo, and I'm showing you this photo to illustrate a concept that I like to begin with, and that is the concept of disturbance. And when it comes to our developed landscapes and all of our landscapes, we are operating around the process of disturbance. And disturbance can be both a natural occurrence, such as a flood, hurricane, weather event, fire, etc., or a human caused event, such as logging, or what we'll be talking about today, development. And in this case here, when a disturbance is done with a light enough touch, nature has a chance to bounce back, which is happening in this photo. Whereas in the places where we live, looking at this is an overhead view of what a typical suburban environment might look like in the United States. Unfortunately, we often don't give nature a chance to bounce back. And one of the primary culprits of that is lawn. And so today we have over 40 million acres of lawn in the United States. And the reason that's especially problematic is traditional lawn consists of non-native Eurasian grass mixes, which support very, very few insects or other wildlife. And they're super resource intensive in many parts of the US. And overall, they're just quite unsustainable. And I'm not here to tell you to get rid of all of your lawn. Lawn can serve a great function. It's great for recreation, socializing, etc. But what I want to think about is how do we balance our personal needs versus our ecological needs of the ecosystems we're all a part of. And so I like to think of alternatives such as this. This was a landscape done out in the Midwest by a landscape designer by the name of Kelly Norris. And this is a property that I think does a great job of blending both the personal and the ecological needs. You can see it's providing an incredible habitat for wildlife, while also there's a little pergola off in the distance for a gathering area. There's a basketball hoop that's taking advantage of the hardscape of the driveway. And in the meantime, it just has an incredible array of native plants that otherwise might be lawn in a suburban environment. And if we were to be able to rethink designing our landscapes to be like this, I think it would change the paradigm around how we think about the places we live as well. And so why do those native plants rather than the non-native lawn matter? And the big one is native plants feed wildlife in ways that non-native plants just don't. And if we want to see these baby birds in our landscapes, we need native plants. Our songbirds feed their young over 90% insects, specifically caterpillars. And so then we'd have to ask the question, what do those caterpillars and other native insects need? They need almost exclusively native plants. So what is a native plant? This is a question I get a lot, and it can be a fairly nuanced definition, but I like to focus on two main points: relationship to place and the ecological function. So when it comes to the relationship to the place, how long has that plant been there? Here in New England, for example, I think of a native plant as something that was here prior to European colonization several hundred years ago. That said, plants have been moving around North America for thousands of years through indigenous cultures and megafauna, etc. So plants naturally move, but the rate at which they've moved in our globalized environment is something entirely separate. And then really zooming in to think about the ecological function of the plant. So what is that plant's relationship to within the ecosystem that it exists? Some of our native plants play a much more important role as far as the food that they provide for our insect species, and we call these plants keystone species. This picture here is of the red oak, and this is the #1 keystone species in North America. It hosts over 500 types of caterpillar species. And which leads me to the next subject, host-plant relationships. And so when I say keystone species that hosts many types of caterpillars, what does that mean? And a great way to illustrate that is with our iconic monarch butterfly. And so monarchs have a very, very particular relationship with milkweed and are completely dependent upon it. Every year, monarchs make a long journey north from their overwintering grounds down in Mexico. And it takes them 3 generations to reach Maine. All along the way, they are seeking out one plant in particular, and that's milkweed. Because while the butterflies can seek food sources from a variety of plants, the caterpillars can only eat the milkweed. And that's because they have a symbiotic relationship where the caterpillars have evolved over thousands and thousands of years to be able to process the toxins that milkweed produces that ward off many other species. And so while this is just one example of a species and its relationship to a particular plant, you can see this interaction time and time again across the landscape. So when thinking about how much is enough in our developed landscapes, how many native plants are enough to support the wildlife that we want to attract, there's a study done in 2018 on the Carolina chickadee chickadee, which spoke directly to that. And what the study did is they looked at a nesting pair of chickadees, and they found that when raising their nestlings, they need to feed their nestlings 400 to 700 caterpillars per day, which amounts to 5,000 to 10,000 caterpillars over 2 weeks, which is an extraordinary number. It's hard to fathom. And in order to be able to make that many trips back and forth from the nest, they really need to stay within a 2-acre area. If they have to go beyond that distance, it's just not sustainable. And what they found is if within that 2-acre area, if the biomass of native plants drops below 70%, so for example, if it's just the majority is just hardscape and lawns, then the chickadees would not be able to sustain a hatchling of nestlings. And this is a really, really helpful study. One, it's on a chickadee. It's on Carolina chickadees, but it could be used for a whole variety of songbirds. And it also gives us this benchmark of 70%, which I think of as a really attainable threshold for a lot of us to aim to think about what to work towards. One other species that I like to highlight here in Maine is the black-polled warbler. And this has a really, really interesting migration story, in that every year it migrates northward. It's migrating right now up to the boreal forest where it breeds. And then, but what's of particular interest here in Maine, or in southern and mid-coast Maine especially, is its southern migration path. And as you can see, there's this narrow band shown in yellow here that crosses over the section of Maine that I am in right now here in the Portland, Falmouth area. That also happens to be our most developed part of the state. And so if we were to develop and not have native plants and wildlife in mind, it would spell disaster for the black-polled warbler, because this is the last piece of landmass that it touches down upon to fuel up before making that 3,000 plus mile journey across the Atlantic Ocean back down to its wintering grounds. And so it's a good example of there are species that may not be here year round. They may even only just be passing through at one particular time of the year. But what we do in our developed landscapes have a direct impact on the entire population. Here's just a couple photos of a female black-polled warbler in a backyard in Portland, Maine, touching down from well-needed rest, eating an ant off a rose bush. And then there was another study done. I'll just run through this briefly, but one thing I wanted to point out, it really talked about the importance of our backyards for the sake of biodiversity conservation. And one piece that I wanted to bring about from this was talking about how to make lawns less bad, and to really highlight how you don't need to redo everything all at once to make your home and your lawn a wildlife paradise. Sometimes the best thing to do is to do it in steps. And so take a traditional lawn, for example. You can make an immediate difference just by changing the height that you mow the lawn. So start by raising the height of the blade to the highest setting, and you'll automatically allow more species to come into that environment, species of wildflowers. Another thing you can do is decrease the frequency of mowing, and that will save time. It'll cut the emissions from the mower, and it'll again allow that many more species that are of wildflowers that will attract pollinators to come into the environment. So there are very, very minimalistic steps you can take to make a friendlier native landscape. And these are all having to do with how you manage or maintain the landscape. So I'm just going to run through a few ecological gardening tips before handing it over to Nick. And the first is just thinking about the area size or the scale of where you are. And generally, when it comes to ecology, the larger the uninterrupted or the unfragmented area of land, the larger the amount of biodiversity there can be. That said, if you are living in a place where you have a very, very small footprint of landscape, even if you just have a porch where you can have one pot, that's when you really want to focus on those keystone plants that I mentioned before that support the widest array of wildlife possible. And so if you have a very small amount of space, maybe or such as a rooftop shown here on the left, maybe plant some goldenrods and some asters, which support a huge, huge array of wildlife throughout the season. Ranging successional zones. So the act of gardening is really the act of playing with the natural process of succession. Going all the way back to that first photo I showed at the logging site, here in Maine, we live in an environment that naturally is almost entirely closed canopy. So if you cut an area, if you cut the trees down and it's meadow for a time, it will immediately restart the process of succession. The trees will try to start growing back in. So always think about that process of succession when you're gardening and understand the vegetative trajectory of the space. Fill ecological niches in space and time. So when it comes to ecological gardening, you really don't, what you don't want is a lot of exposed ground in general. A lot of traditional gardens might be a shrub here, a shrub there, and a whole lot of mulch in between that you have to replenish year after year. Ideally, in nature, there is no space left unfilled. Plants are constantly competing for space, and they're going to fill every bit of space reaching for sunlight. So try to replicate that in a garden by building in the right layers, starting with ground covers and working all the way up. I'll mention synergy. So we talked about the monarch butterfly earlier, and if you want to attract a particular species like a monarch, I mentioned their host plant is milkweed. And so while you definitely want milkweed by itself is not enough to sustain a monarch population, because when that monarch emerges out of its chrysalis in late summer, early fall, much of the milkweed flowers have gone by, and what they need are nectar to fuel up for their journey. So planting things that are going to be blooming throughout the season, such as asters, would be very timely and strategic to support that insect. And then the age-old saying, right plant, right place. Make sure every plant has its particular growing requirements. Our native plants are found in natural plant communities. So try to understand what those natural plant communities are and what plants are right for what place. And also know what plants do not work in certain locations. So if, such as, generally I would discourage planting a big evergreen right up against a house for the sake of green and healthy homes. Sometimes it might be a little too green if not placed correctly. And then just a few management tips. So when it comes to the idea of maintenance, I like to pivot that term to the idea of management, and that with ecological gardens, the idea is not to maintain. You don't want to keep it the same year after year. An ecological garden is a very dynamic thing that inevitably should change over the years. But you do still need to manage it, especially if you're establishing a new space. And it's that establishment period of 1 to 3 years where you do still need to do things such as watering, potentially mulching, weeding, and invasive plant management. And then once it's established, then there are other certain seasonal care tips that you can do, such as edging the garden, pruning it, transplanting, and cutting back. One plant in particular, our blue flag iris. For those who are familiar with irises, if you plant it over the years, they tend to spread outward, and the middle becomes empty. And so that's something, unless you want to plant something new in the middle, you would need to potentially dig it up and divide it and transplant it in that way. And then one last slide I want to include is for anyone looking to learn more about these native plants. I encourage you all to check out our native plant finder at Maine Audubon. That's at mainnativeplants.org. And with that, I'll hand it over to Nick.
Before you start, Nick, I just want to say thank you, Andrew. That was a really nice introduction and very inspiring and compelling. I'm curious if I could just ask you two questions before we turn it over.
Of course.
And this is a good segue, the native plant finder. So what's a good place for people to learn more? So my guess is that viewers are very intrigued by what you presented. So are there any good local resources where people can learn more? And then my second question is in particular about the slide related to layers. That was really interesting, and it made me wonder, how would you find out recommended plants for various layers?
Yeah, so the first one, for if you're interested in learning more, definitely check out our website, mainnativeplants.org. We have both a plant finder, also has links to our plant sale. Where you can purchase plants as well. We have our upcoming festival on June 7th. And we have a lot of programs that are going on. We're about to break ground on a new native plants education center at Gilson Farm in Falmouth, Maine. And we're going to be having lots and lots of programs related to this movement that is starting next year. And we have programs year round currently as well. So check out our events page for that. As far as the layers, so I would say on our native plant finder, it has search queries that allow you to look at different sizes of the plants. And generally just wherever you're planting, the idea is to try to mimic or at least draw inspiration from natural plant communities. The Maine Natural Areas program has wonderful fact sheets on our natural plant communities in Maine. And I visit that frequently for my own inspiration.
Maine Natural Areas program?
That's right.
Great. Maybe we could share that in the email we send out afterwards as a follow-up. Thank you for those two helpful pieces of information. And so now let's turn it over to Nick.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Andrew, for teeing me up. Thank you, Heather, for having me. This is another program from Maine Audubon, but really a complementary program to Bringing Nature Home. So Bird Safe Maine is a program that I co-founded 5 years ago, and we are talking about a specific problem that I'll get into. I don't even want to reveal it, but it's a partnership between Maine Audubon, the Portland Society for Architecture, and the University of Southern Maine. So it involves this. So birds migrate. Right now we are in the middle. Let me tell you, May 21st is a date that birders dream about, because every night there are millions of birds migrating from parts Central America, South America, over our heads into our backyards on their way to breed in our neighborhoods or to breed up into northern Maine and Canada, you name it. But if you look at this slide, you can tell that birds are encountering a much different world than they did a couple hundred years ago, a couple thousand years ago. Humans have made major impacts on the landscape, altering their habitat in a number of ways relative to what Andrew talked about, but also creating some hazards. One of those hazards is glass windows, right? So birds flying into glass windows and injuring themselves or dying is a major population scale problem for birds, believe it or not. And it's one that we in the conservation community and the scientific community and the architecture and design community are just sort of waking up to over the past decade or so and working to solve. And so that's what Bird Safe Maine is trying to do: raise awareness about bird glass collisions, find solutions. This is how big of a problem it is. This is a slide from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service showing human causes of bird mortality around the country. You can see here at the second column down there, the out of date estimates. I will say this is an outdated number, but the out of date estimates is that each year in the United States, between 365 and 988 million birds die every year from colliding with glass windows. That is on the very lowest of estimates. 1 million birds per day in this country are dying after hitting glass. We know now, after a study that looked at recovery rates from birds that have didn't die right away but sort of flew off, that we know that those are recovery is actually lower than we expected, so that mortality is increased. People suspect that over 1 billion birds in this country are dying after hitting glass. This is a major, major problem. It far outweighs really any other domestic problem except for cats, probably, and habitat loss. And so it's something we could do something about, though. These are our houses, these are our windows, we could take some action. Starts with learning a little bit about the problem. Glass is the major problem, right? So this is the Javits Center in New York City. This is a gigantic convention center. And this was, for many years, the most dangerous building on a route surveyed by New York City Audubon. We'll come back to this, I think, in a little bit. Glass is dangerous for two reasons. Number one, it's reflective, right? This slide is self-explanatory. If you're a bird flying through the air, you don't know what glass is. You have no idea what's going on. You think you're flying through the sky and you hit a glass window. It's as simple as that. Glass reflects the sky. It also reflects habitat, right? So this is actually a more common cause of strike, more than sort of open sky, is that a lot of songbirds, as they migrate, they don't like to be out in the open. That's our whole deal. They move from dense cover to dense cover. And so they are sort of frantically flying through open space to find more cover. They see what looks like a forest reflected in the windows, and they hit the glass. It's as simple as that. So the reflective nature of glass is a big problem. But glass is also transparent. So in certain conditions, you can see right through glass. It's invisible. We all, I'm sure no one in this has, but we know someone who's walked into a glass door by accident, right? It happens. And so because it looks invisible if you're not really looking at it. And so, for example, this is a building in Washington, D.C. I was introduced to this work when I lived in Washington, working for a group called Lights Out DC, or volunteering for them. And this is the Thurgood Marshall Judiciary Building in DC. And it's this big, these two big stone buildings connected by this giant glass atrium. And at certain parts of the day, the atrium reflects the sky, right? So there are birds flying through and they think they're headed in. But at night, the atrium is lit from within, and there's these big bamboo trees inside. And if you're a bird, you see these trees lit up and you fly right over there. You don't see the glass that's in the way. And we used to find lots and lots of birds in front of this building. So the invisibility of glass coupled with the reflectiveness of glass is what makes it so dangerous. Lights are also an issue. And there's sort of a dual understanding that's being worked out among the science right now about the relative contributions of glass and lights. Lights attract birds. We know that. It's a little confusing as to exactly why, but one leading theory is that we all know that lights attract insects, right? So you have an outdoor light outside, you have moths and things. Birds are coming to eat the insects. Birds migrate in sort of chains. They're calling to each other all the time as they're migrating. So as birds sort of detour down to lights, others are following down them. And so exposed lighting can bring more birds into urban areas, which means they're more likely to hit the glass. So thankfully, one of the reasons I really love this project, similar to Andrew's Bringing Nature Home project, this is something we can do something about. Right? This is something that we have the power. Climate change, we can do something about, we know, but it's a less tangible problem. We are in charge of the glass and we can fix it. So, for example, this is the Javits Center that I mentioned, the #1 bird killer in New York City for many years. They said, this is embarrassing. We don't like to be the #1 bird killer anymore. And they went and, as they were doing a changeover of the glass, they added a special type of glass. I'll show it. It's actually, I'm skipping a slide here, but they use this called fritted glass here, a special type of glass that has some ceramic frits printed on it, which don't disrupt at all. It's sort of counterintuitive, but when you're looking out a window, you don't look at these dots at all. This gigantic all glass, very deadly building reduced their bird strikes by more than 90% by switching to this fritted glass, and it works great. There are lots of ways that we can sort of replicate this at home. And one of the things that Maine Audubon does as part of our Bird Safe program is raise awareness of the different solutions. The bottom line for a solution is that anything that lets a bird know that there's a window there instead of trees or the sky is a solution. And so as this the bird glass collision issue is becoming more and more accepted and more well known, and as homeowners are asking builders for solutions, they say, I want to build a house that doesn't kill a lot of birds, more and more solutions are coming on the market all the time. There are solutions that you can be applied yourself to the window. There are solutions that you can when you buy the window, the solutions are already on there. There are things that go on the glass. There are things that go outside the glass, and we're still learning, and new products are coming out on the market all the time. So we're really, following the trends. For folks who come to us and say, I have a window or two in my house that there's all kinds of collisions, this is one of the major products we recommend. This is called feather-friendly decals. In here, these are single strips. We actually, there's some sort of a better product that's a little wider, a little easier to install. This stuff works fantastic. And when it comes to retrofitting, so if you have a building that exists that is causing problems, this is sort of the #1 product in America to use as a retrofit. We have worked with the LL Bean headquarters, in the new LL Bean headquarters in Freeport, which is experiencing significant problems on the backside of their headquarters when they opened it, which faces the woods. And they did a large retrofit using feather friendly back there. One of the things that Bird Safe Maine does is monitor the streets of Portland to raise awareness and understanding about this problem in downtown Portland. Over years of that monitoring, the Memic building was one of our biggest strike, one of the buildings causing the most strikes. We work with them on a retrofit, and in the year and a half since they put that up, we found 0 dead birds back then. So this stuff really works well. It's really popular in Maine. I'll talk a little bit about some techniques for installing, but feather friendly is probably the best home product that we recommend, but there are others too. Here's a Javits Center. One of the things we do all the time is work with kids. You could use tempera paints and paint the outside of the window, draw a little picture. This is a great strategy that is washable. It's seasonal. You can do it on and off. Maine Audubon, we have all kinds of campers at our building all the time. And at the culmination of camp, we have them paint on the windows. There are acid etched glass that you can buy from the manufacturer that have various patterns of etchings in them. The new Cruise Center for the Arts on the USM campus has some really cool dotted acid etched glass in it that you can see when you tour that building or go through there. Another product that is out there that has a lot of promise, but right now is not really there, is ultraviolet glass. So the idea here is that birds can see, most species of birds can see light in the ultraviolet spectrum, but humans cannot. And so when we talk with folks who are concerned about the potential visual impacts to humans, we hear from architects who say, I don't want stuff on my windows. And let me say just quickly, that is really sort of decreased over time. As people become more and more familiar with the look of, especially, dots on windows, we don't hear from people anymore as much about concerns about the look. But the thinking was, if we layer ultraviolet strips material inside the glass, then to a bird, it looks like a solid thing. But to a human, it looks like nothing, it looks like no change at all. And that's true. And in some instances, that works well. This technology does not work as well as other technologies. It can be very easily overwhelmed in harsh light or in fog. And there are certain birds like hummingbirds or mourning doves that don't see ultraviolet light. And so this doesn't help them at all. We find actually a lot of hummingbirds on some of our walks. And so we don't really recommend ultraviolet light now. It's also by far the most expensive product. But the products are improving all the time, and we have hope that ultraviolet light will continue. Finally here, also when I'm asked about home remedies, there are these things called Akopian bird savers, invented by a guy named Jeff Akopian. You can see in the middle of this window here a couple of strings hanging down. These are parachute cords, which are just hanging down like sort of exterior curtains on the outside of the window, and are either installed in a variety of ways on the outside. They hang down like little curtains. They provide double sort of protection. The curtains themselves allow birds to see that there's something there, but also the shadow that's sort of moving back. These are really effective and are by far the most cost-effective and easiest solutions. At Gilsland Farm, which is our Maine Audubon headquarters in Falmouth, we have all of these solutions up on the windows that we have. And so if you're ever interested in seeing what some of these products look like on an actual window, please come visit us in Falmouth, and we will show you what's going on. So those are some products that you can use. The one major tip, and this is sort of frustrating, but it is the truth, is that all solutions have to go on the outside of the window. All solutions have to go on the outside of the window, because if you think of a window like a solid structure like this, it's the outside surface that's causing the reflection. And if you put something on the inside surface, that outside reflection really overwhelms it. So you can't just draw the curtains. You can't just sort of put stickers on the inside, because it's the outside surface that is causing the reflection. And so I wish it were as simple as just drawing the curtains or doing something inside, but it has to go on the outside to be effective. And so that's something to keep in mind. I should say too, one of the things that we talk about when we talk to architects and designers is that it is much easier and cheaper to build a building that is bird safe than it is to come in and retrofit a building that's causing a lot of problems, right? If you build an all glass giant building and then you say, oh man, we have all these bird strikes, what can we do? Your options are way limited, and it's probably more expensive than it is to consider that on the outset. So we really try to get in to talk with people before they design a building, so you can avoid something like this, right? This is not a great building if you're a bird. And part of the reason is because there are some specific architectural features that are more dangerous than others. One is pass-through conditions. So this is when you look through one window and out the back window, and you can see habitat beyond. This house is all of that, right? This house is a pass-through house. And so this building is, I cannot imagine the number of dead birds they must have to clean up around this building, wherever this is. But this is something that if we can avoid or talk about before we get to this point, then we would be able to avoid it. Corner windows like this are also a potential problem. So corner windows are essentially a pass through that's on the corner. A lot of times when we find bird strikes in the city of Portland or elsewhere around the state, it's on the corners of buildings where birds are coming by. And so this type of fashionable corner window is something to avoid too. So Bird Safe Maine has existed to do a couple of things. When we started in 2020, it was really to understand, are bird strikes a problem in Maine? And specifically, are bird strikes a problem in Portland? And so what we started doing is we have these volunteers, these crazy volunteers, who get up at a very early time of day and walk a route around the city of Portland in spring and fall migration, looking for dead birds or injured birds. So we've been doing that spring and fall for 5 years. We had volunteers out in the city of Portland at 5:15 in the dang morning, this morning, and every day in May so far, looking for birds. And we've done that for years. And we have found everything we've expected to find, right? We have found hundreds of birds on the streets of Portland of every species we expected to find. And more importantly, we find them more often against glass buildings than we do against non-glass buildings. So the Portland has a really cool architectural history where we have a lot of sort of older buildings that are not dominated by glass, a lot of bricks with smaller windows and mullions between the windows. and sort of a newer style of architecture that's glass dominated. And so we compare, we walk by all those buildings, we find the birds against the glass buildings and not against the not glass buildings, right? So we've really proved what we wanted to prove. And so the next step is doing something about it. And so we have done a couple things in Maine, and our little program is actually one of the leading success stories for bird safe policy in the country now. We've taken a couple of actions. The first is in 2023, we passed a bill in the state legislature to require the development of bird safe guidelines that are used for public buildings. So these are any building in Maine that uses public funds, and that includes all schools and most large buildings, to at least consider the use of bird safe materials and bird safe strategies when they're designing the building. So these are voluntary guidelines, which is not ideal, but it still gets architects to think before they build their building about how they want to do it. And so this was passed in 2023. We just completed those guidelines. This takes a long time to actually do them. We just completed those guidelines a month or so ago, and those are now in use for builders doing state projects in Maine, which is great. Then last summer, look at me there, same watch, still going, we passed an ordinance in the city of Portland. So we are proud to be the first bird safe ordinance in New England, one of only about a dozen or so around the country, that now requires 10,000 square feet plus buildings in Portland, which is most of the buildings that we find strikes against, to have bird safe glass. So this is a required thing. So there's a ton of different products out there, and a growing number all the time. But now buildings in Portland need to incorporate bird safe measures before they're built. We're really proud of that, and we're excited about moving forward. So we're making a lot of progress, and that's what we're doing. And that's the last slide.
Thank you. That was super informative, and great to know that you also have some of the products available at the nature store in Falmouth. I'm curious, you had a slide that showed a few different styles of, I believe they were actually embedded in the windows, and one of them had kind of an organic, reed sort of shape to it. Are there any stickers that look like that?
Sure, there are stickers across the gamut, and a growing number all the time of styles and shapes and patterns. One truism in this work, though, is that you need to have good coverage on a window to have it be effective. So if you think about a bird, they are used to flying into tight spots, right? A warbler flies into a tree and it knows not to hit the branch, but to land perfectly on it. And so if, for example, you put, and this is what I grew up doing, the one hawk decal on a window, a bird will just fly to the other parts of the window because those are not covered. And so the good thing about some of those dot patterns and others is that they provide a lot of coverage on the window. Ideally, a 2-inch by 2-inch or at least a 2-inch by 4-inch pattern is proven to be most effective for to let birds know that they shouldn't go near this window at all. And so sometimes when we talk about different decals and things, they lose effectiveness because they aren't as comprehensive. But there are lots of styles, colors, shapes, and patterns. And I will say again, and you can see this by coming into Gilson Farm, when these are on the window, you don't even notice it. You look right through it at the thing beyond it. And no one I know, and I'm listening for this and wanting to know, has ever sort of complained about the visual impacts of the decals once they're up. They're really inoffensive, despite it not seeming that way.
That's great to know. It was also, I was surprised, I hadn't thought of it that way before, but surprised about the comment as the windows that are facing the forest ended up being more problematic. You kind of think of the windows out in the open, but with the reflection of the trees, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, sorry. Well, there is a lot of, it can be difficult to know in advance which windows are going to be the ones. Birds have patterns in their head that we don't really understand, and sometimes people say, man, I have this small window that is causing strikes, and then the big window over there doesn't do anything. And so a lot of times homeowners know, right? You've seen the birds striking or heard them strike, And so if you start with those windows that you know to be a problem, that can be really helpful.
Yeah, I have one in mind at my house now, so thank you.
There you go. Yeah, right.
Well, let's go ahead and switch to some reader questions. We do have quite a few that came in during the registration process and a few more that came in today. Another note, if you are watching and have an additional question, please feel free to add it to the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. So first off, we do have a couple of questions from listeners who are currently renting and looking for some renter-friendly ways to support the birds. I think that's probably a good one for you to start off, Nick.
Sure, yeah. There's lots of things you can do, even if they're not your windows. And the two I would recommend, first of all, one of the most common bird safe products in Maine that we don't even think of are insect screens, right? A lot of us have those mesh screens that go on our windows. That means you can open your window without all the bugs coming in. Those are 100% bird safe. And because the birds either see that, or if they strike, which they don't, they just bounce off and not injure themselves. And so if your home has insect screens, or you have the potential to install insect screens, those things are super helpful. The other two solutions I may recommend is the Acopian bird savers. And I saw the question down below about the name of those parachute cords. It's Acopian, Acopian. It sounds like a sort of ornithological word, but it's just the guy's name, Jeff Acopian. Acopian bird savers. Those things are great. And that website, Acopian, I don't know if it's bird savers, whatever. If you Google it, go to the website, you can buy the products from them, or he gives you lots of DIY instructions to make your own. At Gills and Farm, we have both the versions I made and hung on a window, and then the official ones from Jeff Acopian himself. Those are great. And because you can do that DIY, or because it's there's a variety of ways to put them up, you can put them up in ways that are removable easily, right? And so if you're renting, you could attach those up top and then take them down when you were leaving. The other is paint. And so these are tempera paints. Think of the things that car dealerships write on the windows to advertise their cars. Those are all washable or removable. And so those can be taken off. One thing we recommend is that very frequently, especially if you're in an urban area, strikes occur in April, May, and then June, July, April, May, and then September, October, in fall migration. If you keep up those solutions for those months and then take them off in the other months, you may be fine. That may vary depending on your location, but those are the types I'd recommend.
Great, thank you. This next one's for you, Andrew. Another listener who also rents is interested in rewilding a small parking lot next to their backyard and deck to attract birds. Do you have any low-cost advice?
Yeah. So I would say, again, if it's depending on the scale of the site, generally, the smaller the plant, the better it is for the plant's long-term health when you start. So rather than buy the biggest thing you have to have an immediate impact, just always aim smaller. And that can go all the way down to not even having a potted plant. You can, if you want to start from a seed, that's probably the most cost-effective thing you could do. And we have a lot of great resources for that here in Maine, including Wild Seed Project, who talks about the importance and value of doing just that. So growing from seed is a great way. Otherwise, just aim for plants that spread. That there are a number of native plants that we have that are really, really vigorous, that are not invasive. They're native, but they spread really well. So think about plants that do the work for you, that you don't have to continue planting every year. Find those colonizing plants.
Do you have any specific examples?
So depending on what the site conditions are, if it's shady or sunny, but golden ragwort is one that comes to mind. Anemone canadensis. These are ones that in the gardening world sometimes get a bad reputation just because of how wonderfully robust they are. So those are a couple that come to mind like that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Okay, a couple of viewers are looking for suggestions about, this kind of gets to the question we just had, but about which specific plant and shrub species are most beneficial and also some lower cost options. I think we touched on lower cost, but do you have any specific suggestions on most beneficial?
For shrub species, is that?
Yeah, it's a plant and shrub species.
Yeah, so so for shrubs, shrub dogwoods, whether that's red twig, silky gray, alternate leaf dogwoods, that all the dogwoods are phenomenal. Viburnums as well, nannyberry, high bush cranberry, arrowwood, viburnum, those are all fantastic. I really love both dogwoods and viburnums for that. Blueberry,
Beautiful too.
Blueberry is wonderful. It's definitely a keystone species and near and dear to many Mainers' hearts.
Great, thank you. Linda is asking, and Nick, I'm gonna send this one back to you. Linda is asking, are we doing birds a favor or creating problems for them by having bird feeders in our yards?
Hey, Linda, bird feeders are great. We're not, I mean, they can be a problem, and there are ways to make birds feeders super safe, and so that everybody wins. One of those is addressing the windows, for sure. That's part of it. Some other ones include keeping those birds feeders clean, right? Which means changing the seed out, especially if it rains and gets moldy and gross. Another one is making sure that bird feeders are safe from predators like cats, like bobcats or foxes. Largely, that could be making sure that your bird feeders are sort of out in the open a little bit more. A lot of times, a predator, if there's a pole going in the ground, predator could hunch down in there and hide and then get birds. And so, not having it, with a lot of vegetation around is helpful. But no, birds, and I should say too about birds feeders. The birds have lots of sources of food generally, and so they don't rely 100% on your feeder or any one feeder, and so it's an additive thing, and everybody loves it. So so go for it.
In my neighbor's yard, I think it's the squirrels that rely on it more than the birds, although I do see birds.
And good luck with that.
Andrew, I'm going to send this next one back to you. If a bird eats ticks in a yard sprayed for ticks, will it hurt the bird?
I don't know if that's the best one for me. Nick, do you have any thoughts on that?
It's a good question. I would say yes.
Makes sense.
Pesticides cause injury. Pesticides that are accumulated on insects cause injury when birds eat them. This is something that's not just related to ticks, but all pesticides, which are a major contributor. Ticks are crappy, and this is a very bad tick spring, let me tell you. Be careful out there. But at the same time, for birds that eat ticks, which include turkeys, not a lot of, frustratingly, not enough birds eat ticks, if you ask me. But turkeys do, and other ground birds. If you have chickens or guinea fowl in your yard, they'll eat them. But it's probably not a great combination. If you don't have turkeys around, then you probably don't have a lot of birds that are eating ticks. So I'll leave it there.
Any suggestions for keeping neighbors' cats away? I know that there are some plants that attract cats, catnip. Any that do the opposite?
No, not plants.
Yeah, I don't have any plants that come to mind.
That's actually a very deep and thorny question, or how to keep cats out of your yard. It's funny, we typically don't allow a neighbor's dog to be running in our yard, or a neighbor's kid to be running in our yard if you don't want them. But cats are much harder to exclude. We strongly recommend people to keep their cats inside. But other than that, there's not a lot of things that you can do that won't make your neighbor very angry.
All right. Another one for you, Nick. Joseph is very interested in stopping window collisions and wonders if there are any specific noises that bother birds.
Oh, that's a great question. And it's actually really funny. I was just in Washington, D.C. I used to live there, and I showed that building, the Thurgood Marshall building, the one with connected that was lit up the bamboo at night. So I was down there and I was hearing this noise, and they were blasting hawk calls. And I asked my old friends who still work the program, is this a bird deterrent thing? And they said, yes, they think they are trying to do the hawk calls to keep migratory birds away from there. And I said, is it working? And they said, no. Long story short, there are not noises that will keep birds away. And likely playing a noise would drive you crazy long before the birds. And so, unfortunately, I don't think that's a solution that has a lot of traction, although it would be nice because it's a little less, I don't know, physical.
Back to the bird feeders and squirrels. Somebody is asking if you have any tips to keep squirrels and chipmunks at bay. They've tried a squirrel proof feeder and it had a chipmunk on it within an hour.
No way. So it'll be a battle that lasts your whole life. Let me just leave it there. Squirrels are extremely acrobatic. They are hungry, and they make it their mission to try to do it. And so the first thing is don't take it personally, right? They are not evil. They're just hungry. I went through years of battles to keep the squirrels off my feeders, but now I don't have them on it. What I did at my house was, first of all, I moved my feeder away from anything they could jump to it from. I had this fence that was nearby, and even though it felt like 100 feet, they were still jumping and leaping on the thing and knocking everything over. I finally moved it to a distance where they weren't jumping from the fence. That's number one. Second thing too is I put what's called a baffle on my pole. My baffle, there are a couple ways to do it. Mine one is this sort of long cylinder that hangs midway in the pole that is too wide for them to sort of shimmy up, and they can't get on the feeder that way, and they can't jump up on top. And so that has worked great. That works. If that doesn't work for everybody, you're kind of out of luck. One thing we do at Maine Audubon, where we have feeders that are sort of impossible to keep squirrels off, we throw a little seed on the ground. When we throw a little seed on the ground, the squirrels, like most of us, they're like, I'm done with that. I'll just eat this stuff, and I won't knock everything off the top or cause a big mess, which is still a win, right? So we just sort of have a truce with the squirrels. They get some stuff on the ground. The feeders are safe. So yeah. You got to keep trying, but eventually there are ways to do it.
Make friends with the squirrels.
Yes. They're wildlife too.
So back to you, Andrew, a question about one of the keystone species. You had mentioned the oaks. So Meredith is asking about pesticides. She said a lot of people are injecting oaks with chemicals to kill brown-tail moths, and she's wondering if this is a big concern as oaks are a keystone species.
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, ideally we wouldn't use any of these synthetic pesticides, and that's where, but it's a tough choice, right? If you have a beautiful 150-year-old oak in your yard, it's hanging over your patio in your house, and you have, it's getting back to that balancing the personal versus ecological needs, right? And so I would say generally just know that any of these chemicals that we put into the environment have their consequences, but you do have to weigh the costs versus benefits with these.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. We have come to the end of our hour, so I'm gonna halt our questions there and say another big thank you to both of you for joining us today. This is a session that I will absolutely revisit, and I'm very excited to research some of these suggestions a little bit more. Also want to say another thank you to our sponsor, Royal River Heat Pumps, and to our webinar producer, Rain Rayner, who manages everything so beautifully behind the scenes. Our next session is coming up on June 4th, and that is going to be all about creative ways to reinvest your property with an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit. So I think that one's going to be a really good one. You can learn more and register on our website, greenmainehomes.com. And also you can catch up on past recordings. We do post them all there after the sessions. So check that out, sign up for our newsletter, follow us on social, and you'll be first to know about future sessions.